Hey, what's going on everyone? Today we have a bit of a long video. Both the GTX 1050 Ti and 1050 launched today. What a surprise, but what took me more by surprise was the benchmarks. I'll admit, I was wrong. My speculation, at least, was wrong. But let's make it right. Turns out the GTX 1050 Ti beats the 960 5 out of 5 times, sometimes by only a couple of FPS and other times by 20 FPS or more. But it does not beat the RX 470. Like I said, I made an FPS per dollar chart in yesterday's video, and today I added onto it and fixed some stuff, so we're going to take a look at that. Just so you know, measuring FPS per dollar is how we know if the GPU we're buying is a good deal. Much like buying a GTX 1066 gig for $330 is a worse deal than buying a GTX 1070 for $330. We know this because the FPS per dollar is higher on the 1060, where you'll be paying as much as $366 per single FPS instead of $217 per single FPS on the 1070. Alright, let's get into the chart. Based on Guru 3D's numbers, we have this. The three darker columns from the left to the right are the GTX 1050 at $110, the 1050 Ti at $140, and the 1050 Ti Gaming X edition at $165. Then the three lighter columns left to right on the right side are the RX 470 at $160, $170, and $180. Just so you know, to come up with the GTX 1050 Ti MSRP numbers, I just took the Gaming X FPS and took 10% off since Guru 3D didn't test a stock 1050 Ti. It still beats the 1050 in every test though. Anyways, in GTA 5, the RX 470 is a better deal at every single price point over the GTX 1050 Ti. Where the Gaming X hits 65 FPS and the RX 470 hits 76 FPS, it's a bit hard to recommend the 1050 Ti both at base MSRP and at $165, the price of the Gaming X version. By heading over to Build a PC Sales subreddit, we can already find the RX 470 at $160 with the $10 rebate card, and really you can also find a GTX 1063 gig for the same price. Even with 10% less FPS with the base 1050 Ti, we're still getting a better deal with each of the RX 470s, and especially with the RX 470 at $160, only $20 more than the 1050 Ti at base MSRP. Next we have The Witcher 3, and we're seeing the same story here, except it's a bit more pronounced. The 1050 reaches 33 FPS while the 1050 Ti Gaming X hits 38, and 10% below that we have the 1050 Ti base version just below the 960 at 34 FPS. Then the RX 470 at 49 FPS. Back to the chart, we see that we get more value out of the RX 470 at every price point we get, to the point of being $1 less per single FPS when compared to the Gaming X 1050 Ti. This is a reminder, make sure you buy the next level up GPU instead of the top of the line, low end one. A GTX 1063 gig or RX 470 will still be more powerful than the GTX 1050 Ti Gaming X, and as we saw earlier, might even be cheaper. Now, we're just going to go faster and get this chart over with. In Doom 2016, the 1050 gets a wimpy 37 FPS versus the 1050 Ti Gaming X at 75. Good lord, that's a huge jump. The RX 470 is at 84 FPS, only 9 FPS ahead of the 1050 Ti. In Battlefield 1, the GTX 1050 was able to reach 45 FPS and the 1050 Ti 58 FPS, both higher than the GTX 960 and the RX 470 at 83 FPS. In Mafia 3, the GTX 1060 got a low 18 FPS, below the 960, and the 1050 Ti hit 26 FPS, exactly the same as the GTX 960. The RX 470, 38. In The Division, the GTX 1050 got 33 FPS, below the GTX 950, and the 1050 Ti got 37 FPS, only 2 FPS above the 950 and 3 below the 960. Then, the RX 470, 52 FPS. Lastly, in Gears of War 4, the GTX 1050 got 40 FPS and the 1050 Ti got 54 FPS, while the RX 470 got 75. Now, here's the rest of the chart. Case closed, the RX 470 at $160, $170, and sometimes at $180 is a better value than the GTX 1050 Ti both at MSRP and at the inflated Gaming X price of $165. But let's talk about it for a moment. You should buy a GTX 1050 Ti if you're buying it at $140 or cheaper. Any more than that and you're seriously limiting the value you get out of a GPU. I only mentioned it once, but at the same time as all of this, you can get the 1063 gig Gaming X at the same exact price as the 1050 Ti Gaming X. The value right there is insane, especially when the 1063 gig comes ahead of the RX 470 in DX11. When these GPUs are this cheap, it's hard to recommend a GTX 1050 Ti at more than the base price. Heck, even the base price, just save up $20 more and you get much more for your money. Now, you should buy a GTX 1050 Ti if in your country it is a reasonable price over the other GPUs here. These are only American prices from Newegg and Jet.com, but let's say in Germany, you might find that AMD cards are much more expensive than Nvidia cards. In that case, it's probably better to just buy a better GTX 1050 Ti depending on the price. Or any other country. Heck, AMD's GPUs might cost less than the Nvidia GPUs in your country. In that case, you should probably be looking at the RX 470 and completely ignoring the 1050 Ti. I don't know, but depending on your country, all this information may vary. Now the big one. You should buy a GTX 1050 Ti if you need a GPU to use in a pre-built computer. We can talk FPS per dollar all day, chart after chart, but the fact is that if you have a pre-built desktop with a 300 watt power supply and no extra PCIe power connectors, the 1050 Ti will be the absolute best GPU you can buy, hands down. Most models will not need an extra power connector, which means you can just slap it right in and be done. So buying one of these for your pre-built low power desktop will be more valuable than buying a new PSU as well as a GPU. But in my opinion, you should not buy the 1050 Ti if you have a proper power supply that can support something better. Again, for as little as $20 more, you can fully utilize your power supply and get a much better GPU such as the 1063 gig or RX 470. Now lastly, should you buy either the 1050 or 1050 Ti as an upgrade from the 750 Ti? Really, this is opinion, but I think yes and no. Yes, the 1050 Ti is a worthy upgrade from the 750 Ti, if only at the base price of $140. The 1050 Ti comes way ahead of the 960 sometimes, and even when it doesn't, it's right above or below the 960, which already is a pretty big leap from the 750 Ti. But the GTX 1050 on the other hand, no. I do not think you should buy the 1050 as an upgrade from the 750 Ti. There is not enough of a jump in my opinion to warrant a new $110 purchase. Heck, I got my 750 Ti for $115. The GTX 1050 seems like the new baseline GPU though if you're buying a brand new computer or a brand new low-end GPU. It's better than the RX 460 and it's also just about the same price, only $10 more. Anyways, thanks for watching the video. I hope this long video helped you decide which GPU you're going to buy. But now, if you need more help picking which specific GPU to buy, you should check out my video on that right here. Like and subscribe to show your support. And again, thanks for watching. Have a great day.